I watched Melissa lean across the table at our favorite brunch spot, her manicured fingers reaching for my phone with that practiced casualness she'd perfected over 8 years of friendship. "Oh my God, my battery just died," she said, lips forming that pout she always used when she wanted something. "Can I borrow yours real quick? I need to call the caterer about your anniversary party." My anniversary party? The one she was planning with my husband. The same party that in my previous life had never happened because by then I'd been in federal prison and they'd been on a yacht in the Mediterranean, toasting to my downfall with my money. I smiled and slid my iPhone across the table. "Of course. You know my passcode." I did know it. She'd watched me enter it 1,000 times, just like she had in that other life. The life where I died in a prison cell at 42, shaking from withdrawal because the guards thought I was faking my seizures, believing I was just another rich criminal trying to game the system. Melissa's eyes flickered with something, triumph, maybe, or greed, as her thumb moved over my screen. But I could see the slight tremor in her hand, the way her breathing had quickened. She wasn't just using my phone. In her purse, I knew, was a small device she'd bought off the dark web, a SIM cloner. It would take her less than 90 seconds to create a perfect duplicate of my SIM card, giving her access to all my calls, texts, and most importantly, my financial apps with their two-factor authentication codes. "Take your time," I said, sipping my mimosa. The champagne tasted like victory this time, not like the bitter dregs of my last birthday before everything fell apart. She excused herself to the bathroom, my phone clutched in her hand. I counted to 60, 70. 95 seconds later, she returned slightly flushed and set my phone down with a bright smile. "All done. The caterer is all set. This party is going to be amazing, Sarah. 20 years of marriage. You and David are honestly couple goals." David. My husband. Her lover. Her co-conspirator. I'd figured it out 8 months into my prison sentence in that other life, when my lawyer finally got access to the digital forensics reports. Every wire transfer that had gotten me arrested, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of evidence that put me away, it had all been conducted using a cloned version of my phone. They'd set me up perfectly, and I'd been too trusting, too naive to see it coming. The FBI had been monitoring my phone, the real one, for 3 weeks before Melissa cloned it, because this time I'd made sure of it. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison had been skeptical when I first approached her 8 months ago, 2 weeks after I'd woken up in my 34-year-old body, gasping and crying, the phantom pain of my death still echoing through my chest. "Let me get this straight," she'd said, leaning back in her chair at the Starbucks, where I'd insisted we meet. I'd found her through careful research, learning she was the lead agent on financial crimes in the Seattle field office. "You're claiming that your husband and best friend are going to commit wire fraud and identity theft using a cloned version of your phone, and you want us to, what, monitor your phone until they do it?" "I know how it sounds," I'd said, "but I have documentation, patterns. I know what accounts they'll target, what companies they'll defraud, even some of the dates." I'd spent those 2 weeks after my rebirth documenting everything I could remember. Every transaction, every email, every phone call I'd later learned about during my trial. I'd created spreadsheets, timelines, financial projections. I'd even managed to predict 3 smaller financial crimes that Melissa and David had already committed in this timeline. Crimes I reported anonymously, giving the FBI verifiable proof that someone had insider information about an ongoing criminal enterprise. Agent Morrison had agreed to a preliminary investigation. 3 months later, I was wearing a wire to my own dinner parties. My phone had been replaced with an FBI modified version, its SIM card embedded with tracking software so sophisticated that the moment Melissa cloned it, they'd have access to everything she did with the duplicate. Now, sitting across from her at brunch, I could almost feel the digital trap closing around her throat. "So," Melissa said, scrolling through her phone now, her real phone. "Have you thought about what you want to wear? I was thinking that Valentino dress you bought last month would be perfect." The Valentino dress I'd be wearing to her arraignment, I thought, but out loud I just said, "You're right. You always know what looks best." 8 months earlier, I'd died on a Tuesday. I remember because it was commissary day, and I'd been saving my money to buy instant coffee, the only thing that made the endless gray days slightly more bearable. But the seizure had come on fast. my body convulsing on the concrete floor of my cell, while my cellmate screamed for help that came too slowly. The last thing I remembered was the fluorescent light above me, flickering, and the thought, I never got to say goodbye to Mom. Then I woke up in my bedroom, the morning sun streaming through windows I'd sold 6 years ago, in a house I'd lost to foreclosure during my trial. David was in the shower, singing off key like he always did. The clock said 6:47 a.m. The date on my phone, my old phone, the one from before, read March 15th, 2024. 8 years. I'd gone back 8 years. I'd rolled over and vomited into the trash can beside the bed, my body rejecting the impossibility of it all. But when David came out, concerned, asking if I was okay, if I needed to stay home from work, I'd seen his face. Younger, unmarked by the guilt I'd learned to read in those last months before my arrest. This David still loved me, or at least, he hadn't decided to destroy me yet. That came later. That came with Melissa. They'd met at my 35th birthday party, which I'd thrown at our house. Melissa was my college roommate turned lifelong best friend, or so I'd thought. She'd just gone through a messy divorce and was staying in our guest room temporarily while she got back on her feet. 6 months later, I'd caught them once, just once, in what I'd thought was an almost kiss in the kitchen during a dinner party. David had laughed it off. She was telling me about a funny tweet, we were just standing close. I'd believed him because I'd trusted him, and because Melissa had been my maid of honor, my emergency contact, the godmother I'd already picked out for the children I'd been trying to have. I'd believed him right up until the FBI kicked in our door at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning, shouting about wire fraud and conspiracy, while David stood there in his boxers crying, saying he had no idea what I'd done. The evidence had been overwhelming. Dozens of transactions from my phone, my email, my bank accounts, money transferred to shell companies, then filtered through cryptocurrency exchanges, eventually landing in offshore accounts. Invoices from companies that didn't exist. Contracts with my digital signature. All of it traceable to me, to my devices, to my access. My lawyer had been expensive and useless. The prosecution has your phone records, Sarah, your metadata, your authentication codes, unless you're suggesting someone cloned your phone, which is paranoid and unprovable. But that's exactly what they'd done. I'd pieced it together in prison, with nothing but time and rage to fuel my investigation. I'd remembered that brunch, the same brunch I'd just relived, where Melissa had borrowed my phone. I'd remembered the bathroom trip. I'd remembered how 2 weeks later, strange transactions had started appearing. Small ones at first, test charges that I'd assumed were fraud and reported to my bank. Then bigger ones. Then the catastrophic wave that had crashed over my life. The SIM cloner had been found during a raid on a dark web operation 3 years into my sentence. The forensics team had traced its purchase to an IP address that belonged to a coffee shop Melissa frequented. But by then, there was no way to prove she'd been the one to use it. My conviction had been airtight, my appeals had failed, and David had divorced me while I was awaiting trial, claiming betrayal and shock. He'd gotten the house, the cars, my 401k, everything. He'd remarried within a year to Melissa. The wedding photos had been sent to me in prison by someone who thought I should know. Melissa in white, David in a tuxedo, both of them grinning on a beach in Turks and Caicos, a beach they'd bought a vacation home near, with my money. Now on March 15th, 2024, I had a choice. I could run, I could divorce David, cut off Melissa, move to another state, and start over. Or I could make sure they paid for what they were going to do, for what they'd already done in another lifetime. I chose revenge. The FBI had been surprisingly easy to convince once I'd proven I had real information. My first anonymous tip had been about a defense contractor in Tacoma that was being defrauded through a fake invoice scheme. I'd known about it because David had bragged about it to Melissa in a conversation I'd later heard on a wiretap recording during my trial. I provided the company name, the amount, and the date. When it happened exactly as I'd predicted, I sent a second tip, then a third. By the fourth one, Agent Morrison had tracked my burner email and showed up at my yoga class. "We need to talk," she'd said, waiting outside in the parking lot. I'd gotten in her car, my heart pounding. This was the moment. Either I was about to become a confidential informant in a case that could save my life, or I was about to sound completely insane. "How do you know these things?" she'd asked, her eyes sharp and analytical. I'd rehearsed this. I'm married to someone who's planning something big. He doesn't know I know. His girlfriend, my best friend, they talk when they think I'm asleep. I've been documenting everything. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had been married to someone planning something big. The timeline was just flexible. Why not just leave him? Because they're going to frame me for it, I'd said. Everything they're doing, they're setting up to look like I'm the one doing it. I need protection, I need proof, and I need them caught before they can destroy my life. Agent Morrison had studied me for a long moment. You understand that if you're lying to federal agents, that's a crime? I understand that if I don't stop them, I'm going to prison for something I didn't do. That had gotten her attention. The next meeting had been in a secure FBI office with Morrison and her partner, Agent Rafael Torres. I'd laid out everything I knew, the timeline, the methods, the targets. I'd shown them my spreadsheets, my projections. I'd explained about the SIM cloning, about how they could use my two-factor authentication to access accounts and make it look like I was authorizing the transactions. When? Torres had asked. The cloning will happen on June 24th at brunch, I'd said. After that, they'll start with small test transactions to make sure they have access. Then they'll execute the main fraud over the following 6 months. Morrison had leaned forward. And you're willing to let them clone your phone? To wear a wire? To potentially testify? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to put them in prison. They'd agreed to the operation with conditions. I had to maintain my normal life. I couldn't tip off David or Melissa, and I had to wear monitoring devices during key interactions. In exchange, they'd provide me with an immunity agreement and witness protection if things went south. I'd sign the papers without hesitation. The hardest part had been living with David for the next 3 months, knowing what he was going to become. This version of David, the one who still kissed me goodbye in the morning and asked about my day, wasn't quite the monster yet. He was just a man who was about to make terrible choices. Or maybe he already was the monster and I'd just been too blind to see it. I'd watched for the signs, the late-night texts he thought I didn't notice, the way he'd started going to the gym more often, which was where he met Melissa for their planning sessions, I knew now. The small withdrawals from our joint account that he claimed were for client lunches. Melissa had moved into our guest room right on schedule, showing up in tears about her divorce in early May. I'd welcomed her with open arms, just like I had before, because refusing would have changed the timeline. But this time, when I hugged her, I imagined the prison jumpsuit she'd be wearing. This time, when David suggested we throw her a divorce party to cheer her up, I'd agreed enthusiastically and secretly recorded every conversation they had when they thought I was out buying supplies. The FBI had been pleased with my intelligence gathering. You're a natural, Torres had said, reviewing the recordings. Have you ever considered a career in law enforcement? I'd laughed bitterly. I've considered a career in staying out of prison. June 24th arrived with perfect weather, sunny, 75 degrees, the kind of Seattle summer day that makes people forget about the 9 months of rain. Melissa and I had brunch reservations at Canlis, the upscale restaurant overlooking Lake Union. It was the same place as before, down to the same table by the window. I'd made sure of it. I wore a wire disguised as a delicate necklace. My phone, the FBI phone, was fully charged and ready. You look amazing, Melissa said when she arrived, hugging me. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and deceit. We ordered mimosas and eggs Benedict, making small talk about her job hunt and my work as a financial consultant. I'd built up my consulting business over the past 8 years, creating a client list of small businesses and tech startups that trusted me with their financial planning. It was that trust David and Melissa would exploit, using my credentials and access to defraud my own clients. The conversation turned to my anniversary party, just like it had before. 20 years with the same person, Melissa said, shaking her head. I don't know how you do it. Doesn't it get boring? In my first life, I'd laughed and said something about how love evolves, how companionship matters. This time, I just smiled and said, David and I have an understanding. Her eyes flickered with interest. Oh? We trust each other completely, I said, the words tasting like poison. We share everything. Passwords, accounts, access to each other's phones, total transparency. I watched her process this. information, her mind already calculating how to use it. That's really beautiful, she said. I wish my ex and I had that. Well, next time you'll know better, I said. Trust is everything. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. When her phone died and she asked to borrow mine, I handed it over with the same trusting smile I'd had before. Agent Morrison was parked in a van 3 blocks away, monitoring everything. The moment Melissa took my phone to the bathroom, Morrison's team would activate the SIM card's tracking protocols. 95 seconds later, Melissa returned, my phone in hand, her mission accomplished. All set, she chirped. Thanks, babe. You're a lifesaver. Anytime, I said. What are best friends for? The next 3 weeks were torture. I had to watch and wait as Melissa and David started using the cloned SIM card, making small test transactions to verify they had access. A $500 transfer here, a $1,000 wire there. Nothing big enough to trigger immediate alarms, but enough to confirm their system worked. Agent Morrison kept me updated through secure messages. They're getting bolder, she texted on July 10th. Just accessed 3 of your client accounts. I felt sick. My clients trusted me. They didn't know their accounts were being probed by criminals using my credentials. Can't you stop them? I'd asked in our next meeting. Not yet, Morrison had said. We need to catch them in the act of the major fraud. These small transactions aren't enough for the charges we want to bring. We need conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, the whole package. If we move too soon, they'll claim it was just Melissa being curious about your phone, or David helping with financial planning. We need them to commit to the big score. The big score, I knew from memory, would come in late September. They were going to set up a shell company called Northwest Digital Solutions and create fake invoices for consulting services to 6 of my clients, tech startups with more money than oversight. The invoices would total $2.3 million. They'd route the money through cryptocurrency exchanges, then into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. In my previous life, by the time the fraud was discovered, the money had been gone and all the evidence pointed to me. This time, the FBI would be watching every transaction. But living through those months was like watching a car crash in slow motion. David started staying late at the office more often. He'd come home smiling, kiss my cheek, ask about my day. Then he'd disappear into his home office for hours, supposedly working on a big project. Melissa would text me daily, always cheerful, always supportive. How's the anniversary party planning going? Want to grab dinner? You're such an amazing friend. I played my part perfectly. I was the trusting wife, the loyal friend, the successful consultant who didn't notice her life being slowly dismantled. At night, I'd lie awake next to David, listening to him breathe, and wonder which version of him was real. The man who'd married me at 24, promising forever? Or the man who'd let me rot in prison while he spent my money? Maybe they were both real. Maybe that was the worst part. The FBI had given me strict instructions. Maintain normalcy, document everything, and wait for the signal. The signal would come when David and Melissa were ready to execute the main fraud. It came on September 15th. David came home from work looking excited, the kind of energy he used to have when we first started dating, and he'd land a big client. I've been thinking, he said over dinner, Thai takeout, my favorite, which should have been a red flag in itself. We should take a trip. Just the 2 of us. Anniversary celebration before the big party. Oh? I said, twirling pad thai on my fork. Yeah, I was thinking Europe. Paris, Rome, maybe the Amalfi Coast. 2 weeks, just us. We could leave in early October. Early October, right when the fraud would be discovered in the previous timeline. He wanted me out of the country, unable to defend myself when the FBI came knocking. That sounds amazing, I said, smiling like this was a romantic gesture instead of a tactical move. But what about work? I have client meetings scheduled. Reschedule them, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. You work too hard, Sarah. You deserve a break. His thumb rubbed circles on my palm the same way it had on our wedding day. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to throw the pad thai in his face and scream that I knew everything, that he was a liar and a thief and a coward. Instead, I squeezed his hand back and said, "Let me check my calendar." That night, I messaged Morrison. He wants me out of the country in October. They're preparing for the main event. Her response came within minutes. "Perfect. We'll be ready." The shell company was registered on September 20th. Agent Torres showed me the paperwork during our meeting at a secure location, a nondescript office building in Bellevue that the FBI used for confidential informant briefings. Northwest Digital Solutions, LLC, he said, sliding the documents across the table. Registered in Delaware, which makes it harder to trace ownership. The managing member is listed as M. Davidson. M for Melissa. They used a registered agent service, Morrison added. Professional setup. They've done their homework. I stared at the papers, feeling the rage build in my chest. This was real. Even with my warnings, even with everything I'd told them, David and Melissa were still going through with it. "When will they make the transfers?" I asked. "Based on the patterns we're seeing, probably within the next week to 10 days, Morrison said. "They're setting up the bank accounts now, establishing the cryptocurrency wallets. Once everything's in place, they'll send the fake invoices to your clients. Using my email," I said. "Using your cloned phone to verify the email access, yes. They'll make it look like you're sending the invoices from your business account. Your clients will see your name, your contact information, your professional credentials. They won't have any reason to question it." "How much?" I asked, even though I knew. Torres pulled out another document. "We estimate between $2 and $3 million split across 6 transactions to 6 different companies. The invoices are for consulting services allegedly rendered over the past year. Since you do actually work with these companies, the invoices won't seem out of place." "Until the companies realize they're paying for services they never received," I said. "Exactly, but by then, the money will have been converted to Bitcoin and transferred offshore. In a normal investigation, it would take months to trace, and the trail would lead right back to you." "But you'll have real-time access to everything they're doing," I said. Morrison nodded. "Every transaction, every transfer, every communication. We'll have agents embedded at the cryptocurrency exchanges, monitoring the offshore accounts. The moment they try to access the money, we'll have them." "And me?" I asked. "What happens to me?" "You'll be protected," Morrison assured me. "You're a witness, not a suspect. Everything we're doing is documented. You have immunity as a cooperating witness." But I'd learned not to trust systems that had failed me before. "I want that in writing. Again. Updated immunity agreement, witness protection protocols, everything." Torres and Morrison exchanged a look. "You don't trust us," Torres said. It wasn't a question. "I don't trust anyone," I replied. "Not anymore." Morrison slid a fresh document across the table. "Already prepared. Sign it, and you're covered." I read every word this time, my lawyer's training from my prison education kicking in. Then I signed. The fake invoices went out on September 28th. I watched it happen in real time, sitting in the FBI surveillance van with Morrison and Torres. We were parked outside a coffee shop near my house, monitors showing every movement on my cloned phone data. "There," Torres said, pointing to a screen. "They're accessing your email now." I watched as my business email account opened, not by me, but by someone using the cloned SIM card to bypass two-factor authentication. Melissa, almost certainly. She'd always been better with technology than David. 6 emails composed, 1 to each client. Professional, polite, with attached invoices for consulting services. Strategic financial planning, annual retainer ranging from $250,000 to $500,000 each. The invoices looked perfect. They had my business logo, my EIN number, my contact information. The bank details, though, led to Northwest Digital Solutions. "They're good," Morrison murmured. "These invoices would pass most accounting department reviews." "They passed mine. In the other timeline," I said bitterly. The email sent, 6 little whooshes that sealed David and Melissa's fate. "Now we wait," Torres said. The first payment came through on October 2nd. $350,000 from a tech startup in Redmond that I'd helped secure venture capital funding for. The owner, Marcus Chen, had trusted me completely. I watched on the monitors as the money hit the Northwest Digital Solutions account, then immediately began its journey through the cryptocurrency exchanges. Bitcoin first, then split into Ethereum and Monero for additional obfuscation, then reassembled in a wallet registered to an address in the Cayman Islands. Following the money, Torres narrated, typing rapidly, "We've got agents at each exchange. They're documenting everything." 3 more payments came over the next week. By October 10th, $1.8 million had been funneled through the system, and I was supposed to be packing for Paris. David had bought the plane tickets, first class, direct flight to Charles de Gaulle, departing October 15th. "I can't wait," he said that morning, kissing my forehead. 2 weeks of just us. No work, no stress, just croissants and wine. "Sounds perfect," I said, zipping up my suitcase. A suitcase I had no intention of taking anywhere. Melissa had come over to say goodbye, bringing a bottle of champagne. "To your trip," she'd said, popping the cork. "You guys are going to have the most amazing time." We'd toasted, the 3 of us in my kitchen. David's arm around my waist, Melissa's smile, bright and false, and me counting down the minutes until this charade could end. "I'm jealous," Melissa said. "Paris is so romantic." "You'll find someone," I said. "Someone who deserves you." The irony of that statement, given that she was sleeping with my husband and stealing my life, was almost too much. "Maybe," she said, her eyes flickering to David for just a moment. Just long enough for me to see the truth. That night, I was supposed to board a plane. Instead, I was in the FBI van watching as David and Melissa made the final transfer, $2.3 million, all the payments combined and ready to be withdrawn from the Cayman account. "They're going to move it tonight," Torres said, tracking the activity, "probably transferring to multiple accounts to make it harder to trace." "They're in the house together," Morrison added, watching a different monitor. "We have audio." She turned up the volume. David's voice came through, excited. "It's done. It's actually done. 2.3 million. Melissa laughing. "I told you it would work. Sarah's so trusting. She never even questioned those invoices." "By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be long gone, and all the evidence points to her." "Poor Sarah," Melissa said, not sounding sorry at all. "Such a shame her consulting business was just a front for fraud." "The FBI will probably arrest her at the airport," David said. "We should probably send flowers to her lawyer." They both laughed. I felt Morrison's hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I wasn't. I was shaking with rage, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to draw blood. "When?" I asked. "When do we take them?" "Tomorrow morning," Morrison said. "We'll execute the warrants at 6 a.m., full tactical team. We want to catch them before they try to flee." "I want to be there," I said. "Sarah, I want to be there." Morrison and Torres exchanged another look. "Okay," Morrison finally said, but you stay in the van. You watch, but you don't engage. Understood?" I understood. 6 a.m. came with rain, appropriate given Seattle's reputation, but also fitting for what was about to happen. I sat in the surveillance van parked 2 blocks from my house, watching the tactical team assemble. 12 agents, all in FBI windbreakers, armed and ready. "Go," Morrison said into her radio. They moved like a coordinated machine, surrounding the house from all angles. The battering ram hit the door at exactly 6:02 a.m. "FBI, search warrant!" I could hear it even from the van, the shouting, the confusion, David's voice yelling, "What the hell is going on?" Through the monitors, I watched them bring David out first, hands cuffed behind his back, wearing only boxer shorts and an expression of genuine shock. Then Melissa, in one of my robes, mascara already running from tears. "There must be a mistake," she was crying. "We didn't do anything." Agent Torres read them their rights, his voice calm and professional. "David Richardson, Melissa Davidson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering." "This is insane," David shouted. "My wife, Sarah, She's the one who has access to all those accounts. Your wife is a cooperating witness, Torres said. She's been working with us for the past 6 months. The look on David's face when he understood, that was the moment I'd been waiting for. Pure, absolute horror. Sarah, he said, looking around like I might suddenly appear. Sarah did this? Sarah documented everything you did, Morrison said, stepping forward. Every transaction, every conversation, every crime you committed using her cloned phone. We have it all. Melissa had gone pale. She knew? She knew we cloned her phone? She let you clone it, Morrison said. The SIM card in her phone was provided by the FBI. We've been monitoring every move you made with it. That's impossible, Melissa whispered. How did she? But she never got to finish that thought because the agents were leading them to separate vehicles, reading them additional charges, securing them for transport to federal detention. I watched from the van as my husband and my best friend were driven away in handcuffs. Morrison got back in the van, looking at me carefully. How do you feel? Satisfied, I said. And it was true. The rage that had fueled me for 8 months, for 8 years really, had finally found its release. We found the offshore account information in Melissa's purse, Torres reported. Complete records of all the transactions, access codes, everything. They were planning to transfer the money to multiple accounts this morning and then disappear? Where were they going? I asked. Greece, according to the plane tickets we found. One-way flights leaving tonight, new passports, the works. They were going to vanish and leave you to take the fall. Just like they had before. What happens now? I asked. Now we process them, formally charge them, and build the prosecution case, Morrison said. You'll need to testify at trial, but with the evidence we have, they'll likely plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence. How long? Wire fraud at this scale, identity theft, money laundering? They're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum, probably more. 15 to 20 years. I'd served 8 before dying in that cell. It still didn't feel like enough. The trial took 6 months to go to court, but Morrison had been right. They pleaded guilty. David and Melissa both took plea deals in exchange for testifying against each other, each one trying to paint the other as the mastermind. It was pathetic to watch, 2 people who'd claimed to love each other turning on each other the moment their freedom was at stake. David got 18 years in federal prison. Melissa got 20, since she'd been the one to actually clone the phone and execute the technical aspects of the fraud. I sat in the courtroom for both sentencings, watching as they were led away in shackles. David looked at me once, his eyes pleading for something, forgiveness maybe, or understanding. I looked away. Melissa didn't even try. She kept her head down, broken in a way I'd once been broken. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I'd prepared one, spent weeks writing and rewriting it, trying to capture the magnitude of their betrayal. But when the moment came, I kept it simple. They tried to destroy my life to enrich their own. They framed me for crimes they committed. They stole from people who trusted me, damaging my reputation and my business. But most of all, they made me doubt myself, doubt my judgment, doubt whether I was worthy of love or loyalty. That was their greatest crime, not the money, but the theft of my ability to trust. I hope they spend every day of their sentences understanding what they took from me. The courtroom was silent when I finished. The judge nodded and handed down the sentences without mercy. My clients forgave me. It took time and effort, meetings where I explained what had happened, where I showed them the FBI reports and the court documents proving I'd been a victim, not a perpetrator. Most of them understood. Some even increased their contracts with me, impressed by how I'd helped catch the criminals. Marcus Chen, the tech startup owner whose company had been defrauded for $350,000, told me, "You could have run. You could have let them get away with it and protected yourself, but you stood and fought. That takes real courage." I appreciated the sentiment, even if he didn't know the full truth that I'd literally died once and been given a second chance to make things right. My business recovered, grew even. I became known in the Seattle tech community as someone who'd faced adversity and come out stronger. But the personal cost was harder to measure. I filed for divorce the day after David's arrest. It was finalized 3 months later, uncontested since he was in federal custody. I got the house, the accounts, everything. Not because I fought for it, but because David had no lawyer willing to argue that a convicted felon who'd tried to frame his wife deserved any marital assets. I sold the house immediately. Too many memories, too many ghosts. I bought a condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. Clean, modern, mine alone. The FBI closed their investigation with commendations for Morrison and Torres. I received a letter from the director thanking me for my cooperation and courage. I framed it and hung it in my home office right above my desk. A reminder that sometimes the system works if you work the system hard enough. 2 years after the arrests, I was having coffee with Agent Morrison. We'd stayed in touch, professional at first, but gradually becoming something like friends. She understood things about me that other people couldn't. The hypervigilance, the need to document everything, the difficulty trusting new people. "How are you really doing?" she asked. We were at a cafe near Pike Place Market watching tourists take photos. "Better," I said. "Therapy helps. And time." "You never talk about how you knew," she said carefully. "How you predicted everything so precisely." This was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I'd practiced the answer. I'm observant. I noticed patterns. I heard things. But Morrison deserved more than that. She'd trusted me when she had no reason to, believed me when I must have sounded crazy. "What if I told you I'd lived through it before?" I said. "That they'd already done it to me in another life, and I got a chance to stop them this time?" Morrison studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "I'd say that sounds impossible. But I'd also say that nothing about this case has been normal from the start. You knew things you couldn't have known. You predicted events that hadn't happened yet, and you were willing to risk everything to stop them. So you believe me?" "I believe that it doesn't matter how you knew. What matters is that you were right and you saved yourself and prevented them from hurting more people." It was the closest to validation I'd gotten. "Do you ever wonder if you could have saved the marriage?" Morrison asked. "If you'd confronted David before he got too deep?" I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times. "The David I married died long before I did," I said. "Maybe he was never the person I thought he was. Or maybe he was that person once and he chose to become someone else. Either way, the man I loved wouldn't have framed me for his crimes." "Fair enough," Morrison said. We sat in comfortable silence watching the market crowds. "What's next for you?" she asked. "I'm writing a book," I said, "about financial fraud, red flags, how to protect yourself from the people closest to you." "That's good. People need that information." "And I'm consulting with the FBI on financial crimes investigations, helping identify patterns, teach agents what to look for." Morrison smiled. "You're good at it. We could use you full-time if you ever want a career change." "I'll think about it," I said. But I knew I wouldn't. I'd seen enough of the criminal justice system from both sides. "And personally?" Morrison pressed. "Dating? Relationships?" I laughed. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm okay with that." "You deserve to be happy, Sarah." "I am happy," I said, and I meant it. "I'm alive, I'm free, and the people who tried to destroy me are in prison. That's more than I had in my last life." Morrison tilted her head. "Last life?" "Previous timeline," I corrected quickly. "Before all this happened." She didn't push it. 5 years after their conviction, I received a letter from Melissa. It arrived at my office, forwarded from the prison. The envelope was thin, the handwriting careful. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. "Dear Sarah," it began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your attention or your forgiveness, but I'm writing anyway because I need you to understand something. I was jealous of you. I had been since college. You had everything I wanted, the successful career, the loving husband, the beautiful house, the perfect life. And I had nothing but debt and a failed marriage and the growing realization that I'd peaked at 22. When David and I started our affair, It felt like I was finally getting something that was mine, someone who chose me over you. And when he suggested the fraud scheme, I convinced myself you wouldn't really be hurt. You were so successful, so put together, you'd bounce back. I didn't think about you at all, really. You were just an obstacle to the life I wanted. I know now how wrong that was. I know that what we did was monstrous. I destroyed our friendship, betrayed your trust, tried to steal your life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I took from you, and I'm sorry. I hope you found happiness, real happiness, not the Instagram version I was so jealous of. Melissa. I read the letter 3 times, then put it through my shredder. Some apologies come too late. Some damage can't be undone. But I appreciated her honesty about the jealousy. It made sense in a way nothing else had. She hadn't hated me. She'd wanted to be me, and in trying to take my life, she'd destroyed her own. There was probably a lesson in that about the dangers of envy, but I was too tired to care. I'd moved on, year 7. I was 41 now, the same age I'd been when I was arrested in that other timeline. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. My business had expanded to 3 offices: Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco. I had 12 employees and a client roster that included some of the biggest tech companies on the West Coast. I'd written 2 books, both bestsellers: Trust Fall, How Financial Fraud Happens in Plain Sight, and The Money Trail, Following Financial Crimes from Start to Finish. I'd been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal. I'd given a TED Talk that had 3 million views. I was, by any objective measure, successful. But I was also alone. Not lonely, exactly. I had friends, real friends this time, people I'd carefully vetted and slowly learned to trust. I had my work. I had my independence. But I hadn't dated anyone seriously since the divorce. A few dinners here and there, nothing that lasted more than a month. The therapy helped me understand why. I was still living in 2 timelines simultaneously. Part of me was here, in this life, successful and free. But part of me was still in that prison cell, still dying on a concrete floor, still carrying the trauma of a life that had been erased. You're allowed to let it go, my therapist said. That life is over. It didn't happen to this version of you. But it had happened. I remembered every moment. The arrest, the trial, the conviction, the appeals, the years of gray walls and institutional food and guards who saw me as just another rich criminal who'd gotten what she deserved. I remembered dying. Maybe that's why I came back, I said. To make sure it never happens. And you did that, she said gently. You stopped them. You saved yourself. So what's next? That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when your entire purpose has been fulfilled? When the revenge you spent years planning is complete? When the people who hurt you are punished and you're free? You live. You actually live. I started small. I took a pottery class. I'd always wanted to learn, but in my first life, there had never been time. Between work and marriage and maintaining the perfect image, there had been no room for messy hobbies. I was terrible at it. My bowls were lopsided, my vases collapsed, my mugs leaked. But I loved it. I traveled alone, something I'd never done before. Paris, ironically, since that's where David had planned to send me while my life exploded. I walked along the Seine, ate croissants at sidewalk cafes, visited the Musée d'Orsay, and stood in front of the Monet paintings until my feet hurt. I went to Tokyo and got lost in the streets of Shibuya. I hiked Machu Picchu and cried at the Wadata sunrise. I spent a month in Thailand learning to cook proper pad thai. I lived. And slowly, carefully, I started to let people in. There was Marcus, the tech entrepreneur whose company had been defrauded. We'd stayed in touch, and eventually that touch had evolved into lunches, then dinners, then long conversations about everything except fraud and betrayal. You're different than I expected, he said one night over sushi. How so? Lighter. When I first met you, you had this intensity about you. Like you were carrying the weight of the world, but now it's like you seem freer. I put down some baggage, I said. He smiled. Good. Baggage is heavy. It took me 6 months to tell him about David and Melissa. Not the rebirth part, I'd never tell anyone that. But the fraud, the FBI operation, the trial. Holy shit, he said when I finished. That's, I knew about the fraud to my company, but I didn't realize it was your own husband. And best friend, I added. How did you survive that? Rage, I said honestly. And then therapy. And then pottery. He laughed. Pottery? It's surprisingly therapeutic, destroying your work and starting over. We started dating officially after that. Nothing serious, we both agreed. Just two people enjoying each other's company without expectations. But it was nice. Normal. The kind of relationship that exists in the present instead of being haunted by the past. Year 8, I woke up on the anniversary of my rebirth, March 15th, with Marcus next to me, sunlight streaming through the windows of my condo. 8 years ago, I'd woken up in my old house, in my old life, with a second chance I didn't understand. Now I understood. I'd been given the opportunity to save myself, to rewrite my story, to make sure the people who'd hurt me faced justice. But more than that, I'd been given the chance to actually live instead of just existing. The old Sarah, the one from the first timeline, had been so focused on being perfect that she'd never been real. She'd curated her life like an Instagram feed, all surfaces and no depth. This Sarah was messier, scarred, harder in some ways and softer in others. But she was real. Marcus stirred beside me. Morning. Why are you awake so early? Just thinking. About how different everything is now. He pulled me closer. Different good or different bad? Different good, I said. And I meant it. My phone buzzed, a message from Agent Morrison. Happy rebirthday. Is that a thing? It should be a thing, I smiled. She was one of the few people who knew the full story, or as much of it as I'd told anyone. I texted back. It's a thing. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for trusting me. Drinks this week? Absolutely. Marcus kissed my shoulder. Plans? Drinks with Morrison? Want to come? The FBI agent who helped you take down your ex? Yeah, I'm definitely coming. She sounds badass. She is. I got out of bed, walked to the window, looked out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in a federal prison in California, David was waking up to another day of his 18-year sentence. He'd serve at least 15 before being eligible for parole. Somewhere in a federal prison in Texas, Melissa was doing the same. 20 years, with parole possible after 17. They'd both written to me over the years. David's letters were always asking for forgiveness, for understanding, claiming he'd loved me even while betraying me. I never responded. Melissa's letters had evolved from apologies to updates on her prison life to, most recently, acceptance that we'd never speak again. I'd stopped reading those, too. Some chapters need to be closed completely. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus was in the shower. I threw on a robe and checked the security camera. A woman I didn't recognize stood on my doorstep, holding a manila envelope. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Sarah Richardson? She asked. It's just Sarah now. I went back to my maiden name, Sarah Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Karen Chen from the Department of Justice. She showed me credentials. I need to speak with you about David Richardson and Melissa Davidson. My stomach dropped. What about them? Can I come in? I let her in, my mind racing. Had they escaped? Were they appealing their convictions? Had something gone wrong? Karen sat in my living room, the envelope in her lap. What's this about? I asked. David Richardson died 3 days ago. Complications from pneumonia. The prison medical system being what it is. She trailed off. I'm sorry for your loss. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a strange emptiness. And Melissa? Melissa Davidson is serving her sentence, but she's filed a motion for compassionate release based on new evidence. What new evidence? Karen opened the envelope and pulled out documents. She's claiming that David Richardson manipulated her into the fraud scheme, that she was a victim of domestic abuse and coercive control. She has a psychologist's report, testimony from other inmates, and a statement claiming David threatened her if she didn't participate. I stared at the papers. That's bullshit. Possibly, but her lawyers are building a case. They're arguing that the original sentence didn't take into account the power dynamics of her relationship with David, and that with him dead, she's no longer a threat. She cloned my phone, I said flatly. She executed the technical aspects of the fraud. She was an active participant. I know, but the legal system is complicated. Her lawyers are good. They might get her sentence reduced. How much reduced? Time served, potentially. She's been in for 8 years. With good behavior and this new argument, she could be out in 6 months. The rage I thought I'd left behind came flooding back. No, I said. That's not acceptable. Ms. Mitchell, I understand your feelings. Do you? Do you understand that she and David tried to destroy my life? That they would have succeeded if I hadn't... I stopped myself before saying too much. If I hadn't cooperated with the FBI? I do understand. That's why I'm here. The DOJ wants to know if you'll testify at her compassionate release hearing. Your victim impact statement would carry weight. When? 3 weeks. Federal court in Seattle. I thought about Melissa's letters, her apologies, her claims of jealousy and regret. I thought about David, dead at 49 from prison pneumonia, dying the way I died in that other timeline. I thought about my life now, successful, free, actually happy. Did I need to keep fighting, or could I let it go? I'll testify, I said. The hearing was smaller than the original trial, held in a conference room rather than a full courtroom. Melissa was there in her prison jumpsuit, thinner than I remembered, her hair going gray at the temples. She looked at me once when I entered, then looked away. Her lawyers presented their case. David as the mastermind, Melissa as the manipulated victim. Evidence of psychological abuse. Expert testimony about coercive control and criminal conspiracies. It was compelling if you didn't know the truth. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and looked directly at Melissa. I've spent 8 years rebuilding my life after your betrayal, I said. 8 years learning to trust again. To believe that people can be good, that not everyone is waiting to stab me in the back. It's been hard work. Melissa's eyes were filled with tears, but I didn't care. You weren't David's victim. You were his partner. You chose to clone my phone. You chose to access my accounts. You chose to steal from my clients and frame me for crimes you committed together. Those were your choices. I was scared, Melissa said, her first words of the hearing. He said he'd leave me if I didn't help him. So let him leave, Basanin said. You could have come to me. You could have gone to the police. You could have done literally anything except betray the person who trusted you most in the world. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you are. You've been sorry in every letter you've sent me. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry you're in prison. Sorry your plan didn't work. But you're not sorry you tried to destroy me. Because if you'd succeeded, if I were in prison instead of you, you wouldn't have given me a second thought. The judge was watching this exchange carefully. Ms. Mitchell, he said, do you believe Ms. Davidson deserves compassionate release? No, Your Honor. I believe she deserves to serve every day of her 20-year sentence. Not because I want revenge, but because that's what justice looks like. She committed serious crimes with full knowledge of what she was doing. The fact that her co-conspirator is dead doesn't change her culpability. The judge nodded. Thank you. You may sit. The hearing continued for another hour, but I could tell from the judge's questions that my testimony had landed. The decision came 2 weeks later. Compassionate release denied. Melissa would serve the rest of her sentence. Marcus asked me if I felt better after the hearing. I don't know, I admitted. We were at my condo cooking dinner together, something we'd started doing regularly. Part of me thinks I should just let it go. She's in prison, David's dead, I won. Why do I still care? Because trauma doesn't have an expiration date, Marcus said, chopping vegetables. You're allowed to still be angry. I don't want to be angry forever. Then don't be. But give yourself permission to be angry now when it's appropriate. He was right, of course. I was angry. Angry that Melissa had tried to manipulate the system one more time. Angry that David had died without ever really accounting for what he'd done. Angry that I still carried the weight of a life that technically never happened, but felt more real than most of my memories. Do you ever wonder about alternate timelines? I asked Marcus. He looked at me quizzically. Like parallel universes? Yeah, like, what if there's a version of you somewhere who made different choices? Who has a completely different life? I guess I'd hope that version of me is happy, he said. And maybe learning from mistakes I haven't made yet. What if that version of you made terrible mistakes? Died because of them? Marcus put down his knife and turned to face me. Sarah, where is this coming from? I almost told him then. Almost explained about the rebirth, the other timeline, the death in prison. Almost shared the full truth of how I'd known to set up the FBI trap, but some truths are too heavy to share. Just thinking about choices, I said instead. How one different decision can change everything. Well, I'm glad you made the choices you made, Marcus said, pulling me into a hug. Because they led you here. To this moment. To us. Us? I said, smiling against his chest. Yeah, us. I know we said no expectations, but I'm expecting you to stay in my life for a long time. I can do that, I said. And I meant it. Year 10, a decade since my rebirth, 2 decades since I'd married David in that first timeline. I woke up on March 15th, my personal New Year's Day, and decided it was time to truly let go. I'd been holding on to the anger, the trauma, the need for justice like a security blanket. It had kept me focused, driven, successful, but it had also kept me from fully embracing the life I'd built. I went to the cemetery where David was buried. I'd never visited before, never saw the point. His gravestone was simple. David Michael Richardson, 1983-2033, beloved son. No mention of husband, because I'd refused to let them at it. No mention of his crimes, because his family had paid for the stone and they wanted to remember him differently. I stood there for a long time, trying to feel something. Grief, closure, vindication, anything. Finally, I just felt tired. I hope you found peace, I said to the gravestone. I hope wherever you are, you understand what you did, and I hope you know that I survived. I'm happy, and you don't get any credit for that. The wind blew through the cemetery, rustling the leaves on the trees. I turned and walked away. Later that day, I wrote a letter to Melissa, the first one I'd ever sent. Melissa, this is the only letter you'll ever receive from me, so read it carefully. I don't forgive you. I probably never will. What you did was unforgivable, and you're serving the consequences of your choices. But I'm done letting what you did define my life. I'm done carrying anger that only hurts me. I'm done visiting the past when I have a future to build. So this is goodbye. I'm closing this chapter. You'll serve your sentence, and I'll live my life, and our paths will never cross again. I hope you find some form of peace in prison. I hope you actually learn from your mistakes instead of just regretting getting caught. I hope you become a better person. But I won't be there to see it. I'm done, Sarah. I mailed it and felt lighter immediately. Year 12, Marcus proposed on a beach in Maui at sunset with a ring he'd designed himself. I know you're not big on traditional romance, he said down on one knee. And I know you've been hurt by marriage before, but I love you, and I want to spend my life proving that not everyone is David, that some people stay, that some people mean it when they say forever. I said yes. We got married 6 months later, small ceremony, just family and close friends. Agent Morrison was there, and some of my employees, and Marcus's parents who'd flown in from Taiwan. No bridesmaids. I'd learned that lesson. Our vows were simple. We promised honesty, communication, respect, and individual growth. We promised to be partners, not just spouses. And we promised that if either of us ever cloned the other's phone, divorce papers would be filed immediately. Everyone laughed at that. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Well, in a year 15, I was 49 years old, the age David had been when he died. My business had gone international. My books were taught in business schools. I'd been offered a position at Harvard Business School teaching financial ethics. I'd turned it down. Seattle was home now. Marcus and I had a good life. We traveled frequently, hosted dinner parties, maintained separate interests, and shared passions. We didn't have children. We'd talked about it, but I'd ultimately decided that I'd spent too much of my life protecting myself to be vulnerable enough to be a good parent. Marcus had understood. He always understood. Melissa was released from prison on year 14, having served her full sentence with no early release. I knew because Agent Morrison called to tell me. "She's out," Morrison said. "Thought you should know." "Thanks," I said. "Where is she?" "Wisconsin, living with her sister, working at a call center. She's not allowed to leave the state without permission from her parole officer." "Good." "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and I was. The news didn't trigger the panic I might have expected. Melissa was out, but she was also irrelevant to my life now. "She tried to contact you through official channels," Morrison added. "Wanted to apologize in person. We denied the request." "Thank you." "Anytime." I never heard from Melissa again. Year 20. 2 decades since I'd been given a second chance. I was 54 years old, sitting in my office at Mitchell Financial Consulting, looking out at the Seattle skyline. My assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Who is it?" "A Dr. Elena Rostova. She says she's a researcher from MIT." I didn't recognize the name, but I agreed to see her out of curiosity. Dr. Rostova was in her 30s, intense and brilliant looking, with a laptop bag covered in academic conference stickers. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for seeing me," she said, shaking my hand. "I know this is unusual, but I've been studying your case for my research." "What kind of research?" "Temporal cognition and predictive analytics. I'm particularly interested in cases where people demonstrate seemingly impossible foreknowledge of future events." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry." "Your FBI case. The way you predicted the fraud scheme with such precision. The way you knew exactly when and how your husband and friend would act. It's statistically impossible unless," she paused, "unless you had actually experienced it before." I said nothing. "I have a theory," she continued, "about quantum consciousness and the possibility of information transfer across temporal streams. I think you somehow retained memories from an alternate timeline. I think you lived through these events once, and then you—" "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Ms. Mitchell, please. This could be groundbreaking research. If we could understand how you—" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "I was observant, I noticed patterns, I got lucky, that's all." "But the specificity—" "Dr. Rostova, I've built a good life, a normal life. I'm not interested in being a research subject or validating fringe theories about temporal mechanics. Whatever you think happened, you're wrong." She looked disappointed but not surprised. "If you change your mind, I won't." After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, my heart racing. No one could know. No one could ever know the full truth, because if they did, it wouldn't just be my privacy at stake. It would be questions about causality, free will, the nature of reality itself. And I was done being exceptional. I just wanted to be normal. Year 25. I was 59 years old, thinking about retirement. Marcus and I were in Paris, finally, the trip David had planned but that I'd actually taken on my own terms, celebrating our 13th wedding anniversary. We were at a cafe, drinking wine, watching people pass by when I saw her. Older, grayer, walking with a slight limp, but unmistakably Melissa. She saw me too, froze on the sidewalk. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she walked over. "Sarah," she said, Her voice was rough, aged by prison and regret. Melissa, I acknowledged. I didn't know you'd be here. I wouldn't have. I'm sorry, I'll go. Wait, I said, surprising myself. Sit for a minute. She sat hesitantly. Marcus watched her warily. This is Marcus, my husband, I said. Marcus, this is Melissa. Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. He'd heard the stories. I'm in Paris for my nephew's wedding, Melissa said. My parole officer approved the travel. Good for you, I said, and meant it. We sat in awkward silence for a moment. I know you probably don't want to hear this, Melissa finally said, but I really am sorry for all of it. I've had a lot of time to think about who I was and why I did what I did, and there's no excuse. I was jealous, entitled, and cruel. You deserved better. I did, I agreed. You look happy, she said, glancing at Marcus. I'm glad. I am happy, I said. It took work, but I am. I'm happy too, she said. Or at least I'm at peace. I have a small life now. I work, I go to meetings, I help out at a women's shelter. I'll never have what I wanted back then, but I've learned that what I wanted was wrong anyway. I believed her, or at least I believed she believed it. I hope you have a good life, Melissa, I said. I really do, but this is the last time we'll ever speak. She nodded. I understand. Thank you for letting me apologize. She stood, nodded to Marcus, and walked away. I watched her disappear into the Paris crowd. You okay? Marcus asked, squeezing my hand. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. Year 30, I retired at 64, selling my business to my senior employees and setting up a foundation to provide financial literacy education to low-income communities. The foundation was called Second Chances because, of course, it was. I spent my days traveling with Marcus, volunteering, taking more pottery classes, and writing a third book. This one, a memoir about resilience and rebuilding. I didn't mention the rebirth, I never would, but I wrote about betrayal, survival, and the choice to keep living even when life seemed impossible. The book became a bestseller, helped people going through divorces and fraud and betrayal of all kinds. I did speaking tours, answered questions, told my story 1,000 times, and each time I remembered the other timeline less and less. It faded like a dream, present but not immediate, real but not current. I had lived 2 lives. In one, I'd been destroyed. In the other, I'd fought back and won. But the victory wasn't in the revenge. It wasn't in seeing David and Melissa punished. The victory was in the life I'd built after, the relationships I'd forged, the trust I'd learned to give again, the love I'd found with Marcus, the peace I'd made with my past. That was the real revenge, being happy despite everything they'd tried to take from me. I'm 74 now. Marcus and I live in a small house on Whidbey Island, watching the ferries come and go, reading books, tending our garden. Agent Morrison retired years ago. We still get coffee once a month. My business is thriving under new leadership. My foundation has helped thousands of people. My books are still in print, still helping people. David has been dead for 41 years. I rarely think about him. Melissa is 73, living somewhere in the Midwest. I heard she became a financial literacy counselor for formerly incarcerated women. There's irony in that, but also perhaps justice. The past is truly past now. The other timeline is a story I sometimes tell myself late at night, wondering if it was real or just a vivid nightmare. But it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this. I was given a second chance, and I used it not just for revenge, but for redemption. My redemption, my life, my choice, and in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all.